This was around 1980, and feminism was at its height. And I began to become very involved in this movement because I actually liked their message that women had control over their body. They could do with their body whatever they wanted. Because I felt like I never had control over anything, least of all my body, because what had happened to me, that this message really spoke to me.
I looked her straight in the eye and I said, "Daphne, I killed my baby." See, we were raging feminists at the time, so for me to say something like that to her just blew her away. And she said, "No, Rhonda, what are you talking about? That's not what you did. You can choose when you're going to be a mother. It's your body. It's your choice."
I sold abortions. I made $25 for each abortion. Now that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but the last month we did 545 abortions, which means my last month's income was $13,625. But I wanted to be a millionaire. And I knew how to do that. Math. 40,000 abortions a year would provide $1 million of income for me. We wanted 3 to 5 abortions from every girl between the ages of 13 and 18. We went into the schools with sex education programs that we knew would increase the sexual activity and therefore the pregnancy rate. Our goals were simple. Get the children to laugh about their parents and their values because they were so embarrassed they would not go home and tell their parents what we talked about. We became the sexual experts in their life. We asked the girls to come in for well woman exams. Come to us. We'll help you be safe from getting pregnant. And sadly, that was a lie because we prescribed a low-dose birth control pill we knew the girls would get pregnant on. We prescribed a pill that in order to provide any level of protection had to be taken accurately at the same time every single day, for we knew one thing about teenagers: they don't do anything at the same time every day. And when she got pregnant, or feared she was pregnant, what would she do? She would call us. We were the sexual experts. We were the ones with the card, free pregnancy tests, licensed counselors. And she called that number not recognizing we only sold one product.
And I had met the boy of my dreams and thought I was in love. And I remember him telling me he wanted to have sex. And he said, "If you love me, you'll do this." And so I did. We had sex. I was 14 years old. As the summer went on, I remember getting very sick. I was throwing up a lot, couldn't hold down water. I fainted a couple of times, and my mother decided to take me to the doctor. The doctor was asking me a lot of questions, and one of the questions was, "Could you be pregnant?" And I said, No, I'm not pregnant." My dad was standing right by the phone when it rang, and when he picked it up, his face went very stone cold. He left and he was gone about 10 minutes. I can still see it in my mind. And when he walked in, he called me into the living room and he said, "Ava, you're pregnant. I would whip you right now, but if I did, I'd probably kill you." He said, "You have 2 choices. You either get out or you get an abortion."
You would think you would know better, but once you're 15 and you're sexually active and this is what you think is comfort and safe and it just is what you've done, this is what you do. And I went to my mom and got a response that we would take care of everything, and her interpretation of that was taking me to a clinic, and that is where my first pregnancy was terminated.
At 16 years old, I lost my sexual purity. My boyfriend and I just went too far, and it happened. And it happened because I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't know how to say no.
I was known as the good girl in my town and in my high school, and I chose the baddest boy in town to have my first sexual relationship with.
Early in the relationship with my boyfriend, we became sexually active, and he was using drugs and I was using drugs, and before I knew it, I was pregnant. My mother asked me what I was going to do, and I told her that I had thought long and hard about it, and that I figured that it would be awfully hard to raise a child at my age, and I just wanted us to all make a clean break. And my mother turned to me and said, "I'm so proud of you." And I hadn't heard that from her in a long time, so I thought that what I was doing was the right thing.
I remember standing in the phone booth with my boyfriend and hearing the words on the other line saying, "Congratulations, you're pregnant." And I quickly hung up the phone and let out a horrific scream. And I thought abortion was my only option.
Right after I turned 16, became pregnant at the age of 16. In a country like Germany, very progressive, abortion on demand, much like it is now in the United States. And the only solution presented at that time was abortion.
I was 22 years old, had a great paying job, and driving a great little sports car, living a very carefree lifestyle. And then I got pregnant.
At the age of 24, I got pregnant. My boyfriend said, "You're not having it, are you?" And I remember that sinking feeling inside, wishing that he'd said something else. But the words that came from me were, "Well, of course not." All my friends told me I needed to have an abortion. Here I am, a single parent of one child. How was I going to feed another one?
I was a cheerleader, I was popular, and I had my life in front of me. I thought that a baby would mess up my life and he would marry me with a child. I scheduled for an abortion the next day.
He was Catholic and did not want me to have the abortion. He asked me to marry him, but a baby was not in my plan. I had plans to go to college, and I just could not see beyond the abortion, and I told him no, I had to have this abortion.
I lived in a co-ed dorm that had parties all the time, and I fit in real well. I would get high and drunk and have sex with boys. All my friends told me, "Why don't you get an abortion?"
When I told my best girlfriend that I was pregnant, she said, "Oh, that's no problem. You know, they've got these places now. You just go in there and you give them some money and they'll get rid of it."
1%. That's the research, the statistics I got when I found out how many people actually got pregnant the very first time they had sex. It's like 1%. I fall into that 1%. Trust me, I didn't plan it. I was 18. Living on Catalina, having a great time, and the very first time I had sex, I got pregnant.
I started thinking, you're crazy. What are you doing? You have no support system. And so just as easily as I decided that I was going to have this baby, I decided not to.
Smoked a little pot, did a little drugs, was very promiscuous. And at 19, found myself back in a doctor's office and terminating yet a second pregnancy.
Abortion was not something that I wanted to do. It wasn't really even something brought up until I was pressured into it by my boyfriend and those around me.
At 19, I had a boyfriend, and I found myself pregnant. I wanted to have the baby, but my boyfriend didn't want me to. And he spoke to his mother, and she didn't want me to have the baby either. So I decided, I felt so pressured, I decided to have an abortion.
Somebody that was close to me had said to me, "You know, your parents forgave you for getting pregnant the first time. Do you really think they're going to forgive you for getting pregnant the second time?" And I believed that lie, and that is what threw me over the edge and pushed me to make that appointment with the abortion facility.
In my early 20s, I was dating a man that was separated from his wife, and we lived together. I discovered that I was pregnant, and because he wasn't available to marry me, we were in a predicament. I spoke to a woman at work about my situation, and she advised me that the best thing that I could do, since I didn't have anyone to care for me or to support me, was to have an abortion.
I'd been taking an experimental drug for a tumor on my bladder. And during that time of those injections of the experimental drug, I became pregnant. And I can remember the doctor saying, "Millie, you need to have a D&C quickly before the baby's heart starts beating."
When my mom was pregnant with me, she was exposed to the German measles and was given the vaccination, which resulted in me being born blind. Later, she told me that if Roe v. Wade had been in existence then, and she knew that there might be a possibility of birth defects, that she would have had an abortion. But fortunately for me, it was 1956, and abortion was not legal.
My heart was trying to tug at me as a mother and as a woman, but my mind kept justifying all the reasons why I should have an abortion.
I remember on one hand, being excited to have a baby and thought about that, but then I looked at my life. I lived in a crappy apartment and I drove a crappy car and I didn't even have a job. Who was I to raise a child?
Each time we had sexual relationships, I kept telling myself I would never do it again. After about a year, I found myself pregnant. And the father then started convincing me that, first of all, I couldn't tell anybody, that my ex-husband would be able to take me to court and take my girls away from me, and that abortion was the only option.
My husband was killed by a drunk driver. A good friend came by to check on me, and one thing led to another, and we had too many drinks, and we had sexual relationship, and I became pregnant.
The appointment for the abortion was made, and my mom, along with my best girlfriend, we drove to another town for the appointment. It was early in the morning, and my mom said, oh, let's just go and have a quick bite to eat at this place across the street. My mom proceeded to order this meal, and she drank and ate, and her and my friend were having this conversation, and it was almost joyous, like we were on a shopping spree, girlfriends with the mom. And to this day, it's just one of my memories that haunts me, that nobody seemed to realize we were about to kill my baby.
My mom took me on the day of the procedure, and she brought her Bible study homework with her to do while I was in there.
I believed at the time that abortion was my right and that it was my choice, and I was very selfish and actually came to believe that having a child would actually be a burden in my life rather than a blessing.
They told us abortion was a quick, simple, easy procedure. 20 minutes, you never have to think about it again.
And they said, well, since you're having so many problems in your life and things are not stable, let us help you with a safe procedure. We'll do an abortion. It won't hurt as bad as having a tooth pulled.
They proceeded to tell me that I was too far along in my pregnancy to have what they called an easy abortion, that I was going to have to take a 2-day procedure. They were actually going to put me into labor, and the word surgery was used. I began to get frightened. I told them I couldn't stay 2 days for this procedure. My parents did not even know I was pregnant, and I had to go home that night. Just before I got to the car, someone from the office staff came running after me and said, wait, we made a mistake. We'll take care of your problem. You'll be gone in 30 minutes, and you'll never think about this day again. I followed them back in because I believed them.
My boyfriend drove me to the clinic that day, and outside there were protesters. And I was so ashamed, I was so embarrassed, and I thought to myself, oh no, I do not want to walk in there in front of these people.
When we got there, there were sidewalk counselors praying, but then they were also protesting there with signs and very loud, and we went into the back door of the clinic, and even sitting inside the waiting room, you could hear the noise, and he began to cry and said that he felt like it was a sign from God and that we didn't need to be there. But I was very self-centered, and I just looked at him and I told him to shut up. And if he didn't want to sit there and wait with me, then he could go sit out and wait in the car by himself.
First, they go back for a pregnancy test, and they're allowed to watch their pregnancy test turn positive or negative. Powerful sales tool to watch your pregnancy test turn positive. And if it's positive, they say, so sorry, go right up to the front, and they pay. But some of those tests are not positive. Some of them are negative. So we would simply say, this test is not sensitive enough to pick up a very early pregnancy. You could still be pregnant and this test would be negative, and I know you want to know for sure today, don't you? And of course she would say yes, and then we would take her back down the hall for a sonogram, checking all the way to be certain she did not read sonograms for a living.
As the nurse was performing the ultrasound, I watched her and she was looking at my baby on the monitor. And I asked her, I said, can I see my baby? And she took the monitor literally with her hands and turned it away from me.
As I was watching the monitor, the nurse and the doctor asked me not to watch. They turned the monitor away.
And I turned to look at the screen and thought, that looks like a baby. Well, she got very upset and yelled at me and said, "Turn around, don't you dare look at that."
And they had the screen turned away from me, and I asked to see it, and she said, "I don't think it's a good idea." I told her no, I really wanted to see it before I went through with it. So she ran the probe across my stomach and turned the screen towards me and showed me a dot on the screen. I thought, that's it? Well, I can do this.
We'd put her on that table and find just a blob in her abdomen. And we all have blobs. Men and women have blobs in their abdomen.
So at 18, just out of high school, I decided to go through with this abortion. I was told it was a blob of tissue.
I believed that it was just a blob of tissue inside of my uterus. I did not believe that it was a baby inside of me at the time.
They explained it to me that it was a blob, that it wasn't anything yet.
But I needed to have this abortion as soon as possible before this blob of tissue turns into a baby.
The nurse asked me if I was okay with the procedure, and I said no, I really wasn't, because it seemed like it was killing a baby. But they all looked very professional. They showed me a film strip of just blobs of tissue. So I thought, they're the adults, they're the professionals, this must be okay. So I went ahead with the procedure.
It was very confusing. I had doctors and society and the law telling me that what I was doing was okay, that it was just, a minor procedure. There was no concern, why are you upset? They just kept telling me, it's okay, it's a blob of tissue. You're a college student, you have your whole life ahead of you, you already have one child.
And she told me that it wasn't even a baby yet, that it was just a clump of cells. And I didn't know anything about fetal development, so I believed her. And in fact, I felt relieved because I thought, well, if it's not a baby yet, then I'm not doing anything wrong.
He also gave me the same advice and said that after all, it wasn't really a baby, it was just a blob of tissue, and that I should get it taken care of as soon as possible, and he could do it right in his office.
This girl doesn't know what a sonogram looks like early. She's been told it's a blob of tissue. Here's a blob on the screen. This is the pregnancy expert saying, there it is, you're pregnant. And then grab her by the bony part of the elbow and squeeze. Do you have your money? Can you do it today?
They said it was easy. They said it was simple. You write your check for $300 and all your problems are solved. Wish somebody told me what really happens.
I say, Granddaddy, I'm getting an abortion. It's a blob of tissue. It won't even hurt. A woman has a right to choose what she does with her body. Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. looks at me and says, that's not a lump of flesh. That's my grandbaby. You're having that baby.
When I went into ultrasound school and I saw for the first time the so-called blobs of tissue that I thought I were aborted, they were babies with a heartbeat and fingers and toes. And when they told me to turn the monitors away from women considering abortion, I couldn't lie.
I bought the lie. I now know she didn't show me my baby. She just showed me a dot on the screen so that I would go through with the abortion.
The next thing I remember was a doctor and the nursing staff coming out of a room from their lunch break, and he was carrying his lunch sack, and he just casually said, "Oh, it's time to get back to work." And I just thought, wow, how could you be so casual about this?
This abortionist was irate because I had to be his last appointment, and I was impacting his tea time for his golf game.
An abortionist's fee is 50% of the total cost of the abortion in the second and third trimester. So for that $4,000 abortion, he pockets $2,000. But he can do 3 second or third trimester abortions an hour, $6,000 an hour. Oh, but we all know over 90% of abortions are first trimester abortions. He can't make that much money doing a first trimester abortion for, say, $300. Well, in the first trimester, his fee is 1/3 of the total cost of the abortion. But we had a technique that is widely used in the abortion industry to keep that abortionist doing 10 to 12 abortions an hour. We used 2 teams of 2 assistants with each doctor. And the first team would set up the first girl, and the doctor would go in to do that abortion, while across the hall the second team set up the second girl. When he finished abortion number 1, he ran across the hall. He didn't stop to do a surgical scrub. He did not stop to do operative notes. He went across the hall, changed his gloves, and started abortion number 2. Now, room number 1 had to be cleaned and ready and the third girl up. So, this team had to get the first girl out, clean the room, get girl number 3 up, so when he finished abortion number 2, he could go across the hall and repeat the procedure with girl number 3. 10 to 12 an hour, $100, $1,000, $1,200 an hour, paid in cash. No 1099, no W-2. You see, we did not want to be responsible for any portion of our abortionist malpractice insurance. They were independent contractors. We never showed their money as income. At the end of the day, they walked out with that cash. I'm certain they reported it all, don't you think?
I remember seeing a girl who was probably 7 months pregnant, sobbing and crying and begging anyone to help her, and nobody did. And I wondered, where was the compassion?
They called my name, that it was my turn to go in for the procedure. And I got up, and a very motherly type woman put her arm around me and walked me down the hallway towards the room. I felt, I need to leave. I want to go. I don't want to do this. This is wrong. I felt almost like I was being pushed in there. She didn't want to help me. She wanted me to have this done, and she wanted to make sure I wasn't going to leave. And this lady got what she wanted.
The doctor and the woman came in and explained to me again what was going to happen. I remember how embarrassed I was because the doctor was like young and really handsome. But again, I was really numb and detached, not wanting to think about what was about ready to happen.
When I got to the procedure room, the doctor didn't even acknowledge me. There was an assistant there who told me I had to take off the bottom half of my clothes. I was not given a gown or anything, and that to just get up on the table.
And I remember getting on the table and being prepped, and I remember them telling me to count, I think, and it was just this coldness.
I was taken into the operating room. The first thing I noticed was it was very cold.
They put me on a metal table that was icy cold. And then they put a mask over my face and began administering a gas to help relax me. And I can tell you there was nothing that was going to relax me. I was terrified.
They laid me on this steel cold table.
The next thing I remember, I was lying on a cold metal table.
I'll never forget going into the procedure room, laying on the cold table. The look of the doctor's eyes were so cold and insensitive, staring at me from behind the mask.
I laid down on the cold table, and I remember shivering. And on the one hand, feeling nothing because of the effects of the Valium, but yet something inside me crying out that I needed to get up and run again, that this was my child.
She put the IV in my arm, and I immediately began to throw up. And she said, "Well, I bet you won't do this again. I bet you won't open your legs again." Very rude and cruel and cold. That was an awful mean statement for her to say. "Well, I bet you won't do this again. I bet you won't open your legs again."
I was just laying there crying, and she patted me on the shoulder and she said, "Oh, it'll be okay. It'll be over soon." And I was just so full of rage. I wouldn't even look at her because I knew what I was doing was not all right. And I knew it wasn't going to be over soon. I knew I had to live with this decision once again for the rest of my life.
I started shaking and crying, and they could not calm me down. And at that point, the doctor told me that he wasn't going to perform the abortion, and that I would have to come back the next day so I could be put to sleep.
And I said, "No, really, I don't want to do this." And the nurse came over and she put her hand on my shoulder and pushed me down and said, "Honey, you're here. Let's just get this done." So I said, okay.
The doctor came in and he didn't look at me, he didn't talk to me, and he didn't acknowledge me. He began to work on me, and I remember feeling horrifying cramps, and it was worse than they had ever told me.
And I asked the woman, I said, "How much longer?" And she said with kind words and gently caressing my hand, "Remember, dear, once the vacuum noise turns on, it will only be 20 seconds longer, and then you can go home and your parents will never have to know." I said, "Yes, my parents will never have to know."
As he dilated my cervix and then started the the suction machine. He was explaining what he was about to do. I remember holding the woman's hand and experiencing pain and looking at her. And the look on her face was almost one of like not knowing what to do for me.
And during the procedure, I went back and I thought about how did I get here? And wishing that I was in my mother's arms like a little child again.
I remember them inserting some kind of vacuum, and then this loud noise came on.
They turned on the vacuum machine, and it was a loud, horrible noise.
The sound of that vacuum machine, I'll never forget that noise.
The awful sound of the vacuum extracting the baby.
And as they began the procedure, my body felt like it was being violently shaken off of the table, and they were yelling at me to be still. And tears were streaming down my face.
The sound of this machine was like this ghoulish generator, and then the pain hit me.
I've never felt something so painful and so awful as that procedure.
It was excruciating pain.
It was excruciatingly painful, and I almost passed out.
I asked for a double Valium that they offered to give us to calm our nerves, but it wasn't enough to subdue the pain.
The kind psychiatrist that gave me the advice turned into a very cold, calculating abortionist. Basically, he said, you'll feel a little tug, it'll hurt a little bit, and that's it. Well, it was much more than that. It was the feeling of my child being ripped from my body.
And immediately, the tears just started rolling down my eyes. I was regretful at that instant, but it was too late for me to say anything or to do anything.
But I don't think anything hurt as much as my heart and soul hurt that moment. Because lying on that table, I realized what they were doing. And it was too late to stop. They sucked the life out of my body that I knew I'd never be able to get back.
And I remember laying there crying and wishing that I could stop it, but it was too late.
The force of that abortion, I literally felt like my soul was being sucked out that day. Every being within my body, every fiber within my body felt like it was being ripped out. And I just wanted that pain to stop.
I looked to the doctor, and as the pain increased and became more and more intense, I ended up looking at him and saying, this is really hurting. And he said, it's almost over. When it was over, I remember having no ability to control this violent shaking of my legs.
But this time my legs were shaking, my body was shaking profusely, and I was crying, and I just didn't want to be there.
And what I thought about was, how could something that's a woman's right cause so much pain?
And I knew right then and there I had made the biggest mistake of my life.
I heard the sound of the vacuum, and all of a sudden I saw a splattering of the blood, and I knew my baby had to be in that jar. I kept trying to get up and look to see, was my baby there? But they kept pushing me back down and telling me I had to lay still. And as soon as it was finished, they wheeled that jar out of the room so I could not see if my baby was there.
I can't remember if it was a plastic bag or whether it was just a plastic container. And it was put on a table, or what I believe was a scale. And the reason I thought that was because the doctor called out a number. And that memory burned in my mind because I realized that was the only remains of the child that I had had inside of me.
I tried to sit up to see what was going on, and she pushed me back down and put her back to me and put her hand on my chest. And I kept trying to get up because I wanted to see. And she took a pillow and put it on top of me again, trying to block my view. I saw her pick up a trash can. And then again, she was trying to almost straddle to keep me from seeing. But at that time, I saw a nurse come in at another angle, and she was carrying a trash bag. My mother gasped and she said, "Oh my God, it's twins." And I heard one nurse say to the other nurse, "It's twins." And then she took the trash bag and she tied it in a knot and she walked out. And I can see it just as clear as day. She walked out with the twins in that trash bag.
The nurse looked up at me and, smiling, said, "Oh, look, twins." And I can remember screaming, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And then I began to scream, "Stop, stop." And I was trying to get up off the table, and the abortionist began to scream at me and tell me to lay still, and the nurse had to come and kind of put her body over mine to hold me down.
And I just had one question before I left that table, left that room, and I said, was it a boy or a girl? And what were once warm and very comforting surroundings and atmosphere, you could have heard a pin drop. And the atmosphere turned cold and stone cold. And the woman broke the silence and said, "Well, what does it matter now?" And I thought, well, yeah, what does it matter now?
I remember sitting outside in the area where they give you juice and cookies, and all of these teenagers were lined up. I was probably 25 years old then, and one looked at me real nonchalantly and she said, "Was yours a boy or a girl?" I lost it. I went, and I thought, God, what did I do?
The nurses that were so nice before, they weren't nice anymore. It was a significant difference in the way I was treated. I was made to feel like I had done something horrible and awful, and of course it's because I did.
That doctor, he said, "You know, Joyce, if I ever see you in public, I'm not going to acknowledge you, and I ask you to not acknowledge me." And I kind of thought he was the good guy.
And these nurses acting as if you just had your teeth pulled or had your appendix out or something really minor. But I'd taken life of my baby.
Well, I tell you today that the abortion did hurt much worse than having a tooth pulled, and the results were long-lasting.
They took me after the procedure into a recovery room, and I just sobbed for the next hour. I don't remember what I was thinking. I was numb, but I was crying.
The next thing I remember, I woke up in the recovery room and I was very groggy from the anesthetic. I was cramping and I was bleeding.
I just laid there and I couldn't get up after the hour. So I continued to lay there in all this pain. I had all this cramping in my stomach.
There was a lot of hemorrhaging, a lot of very, very heavy bleeding.
Afterward, I was bleeding heavily, and the nurse asked me, "Are you still bleeding?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Are you bleeding heavily?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, if you are, you're going to have to go right back in there, and the doctor's going to get right back to work." And so I lied, and I said, "No, I'm fine."
I woke up in the recovery room, and my mother and my girlfriend were at my side, comforting me, and I was hysterical. I was crying, and for the first time, maybe because I was heavily medicated, I felt free to call out and say, you know, it was my baby, it was my baby.
I woke up in the most excruciating pain that I had ever felt, and I knew that this one was different. I knew that there was something different than my first abortion. My fiance came to pick me up, and he had to carry me out of the back door because I could not walk. I was in too much pain.
That opened my eyes to what abortion really was, and I knew that when I walked out of that abortion facility that day that I would never have anything to do with abortion ever again.
On the way home, I laid in the back seat of the car in such agony. I was bleeding profusely and didn't know what I was going to do. As soon as I got home, I called the clinic back and I asked them what I should do, told them what was going on with me, and they said, "I'm sorry, you're not our problem anymore. You're going to need to call your doctor." And I thought, that is the last thing I want to hear right now. That's why I came there and didn't go to my doctor, is because I didn't want to have to call the doctor. So I laid there that day, in my blood, wondering, if I would die.
The day after my second abortion, I woke up and there was a lot of blood on my sheets. I went to get up and I could not stand up. My legs were hurting. I was in a lot of pain and I could walk for maybe 5 minutes at a time.
I started cramping very hard. I was hemorrhaging. I had a fever. I was getting delirious. And my dad, being a pharmacist, went to his store and got me more drugs. I pretty much spent that weekend recovering from the infection and pretty much by myself. No one really checked on me. I just remember a lot of pain, a lot of crying, and a lot of hurt and confusion.
And after Dale left to go into work, I remember almost bleeding to death in my kitchen floor.
The bleeding continued, and it was so bad that one day when I was at work and I stood up from my desk, blood was running down my legs and into my sandals. I drove home to tell my parents that I needed to go to the hospital. And as I knocked on the door and waited for my mom to come to the door, and she opened the door, and she proceeded to see blood all over me, and her first reaction was of sheer terror. She thought someone had shot me. She and my father take me to the hospital where I meet my mother's doctor, her gynecologist that had delivered me 18 years before that time. He told me that I was going to need to receive blood and have surgery. I immediately thought that God was going to take my life during that surgery because that's what I thought I deserved.
2 days after the abortion, I was sitting at the place where I lived, the home where I lived, and started cramping severely. And so I went into the bathroom and had gone to the bathroom and went to wipe myself and felt as though I had passed something. And when I looked down, in my hand was my baby. And I remember seeing the hands and the feet, and that the skin was translucent and tiny, tiny little thing, and where the eyes were forming. And I was so horrified that I dropped the baby and flushed the toilet because I couldn't imagine that that's what I had just seen. And I ran to the phone to call the abortion facility to tell them what had happened. And all they had to say to me was, well, that's too bad. And then they hung up on me.
Pieces of my child had actually been left inside of me. I had developed an infection which led to the bleeding. And then my doctor proceeded to tell me that I could have died from the infection, I could have bled to death, or he might have even had to perform a hysterectomy, which I could have never had children, and I was only 18 years old.
About 2 weeks after the abortion, I got very sick. I had developed a high fever, severe abdominal pain, and heavy bleeding to a point of hemorrhaging. My mom took me to the emergency room in the hospital, and there it was discovered that the abortion had indeed killed the baby, but failed to remove it. And the 2 weeks since then, the baby was basically poisoning my body, and my life at that point was at dire risk.
I go to the doctor. She does a test on me. Yes, she confirms the pregnancy. I go into complete hysteria, and through the test determines that I'm bleeding. I'm bleeding through the pregnancy. She suggests to me that I'm miscarrying, and that because blood equals miscarry, she suggests that we go ahead and do a D&C right there in the office, and we can go ahead and just do that now. And I, uneducated and trusting the doctor, say, fine. We do a D&C. I am thinking the pregnancy is over at this point. I go home, come back 2 weeks later for a checkup, very ill, and say to her, something's wrong. She does a uterine check and discovers that my uterus is still very enlarged. Sends me to a sonographer who does the ultrasound. 30 minutes go by. They're stumbling around with the ultrasound, and I finally say, what is going on? A supervisor comes in to tell me that the baby inside of me is swimming so rapidly up and down the birth canal that they can't get a clear image. I'm obviously floored at this point. And the manager or the supervisor says, the baby inside of you is 2.5 centimeters long. I said, no, I just had a D&C 2 weeks ago. There can't be a baby inside of me. She says, yes. through that whole pregnancy, through every ultrasound, saw a wonderful, healthy baby on one side that is now my son Roman, and I'll never forget it. I saw a deflated sac through that whole pregnancy. So on one side I had life, and on one side it just looked like the tentacle of a jellyfish, that deflated sac, that reminder of yet again life that was lost. I aborted one twin.
When I walked out of that clinic and I walked down Santa Monica Boulevard, I knew I was a different person. I felt like there was something evil inside of me. I felt like I could do anything and there were really no boundaries anymore. I felt murderous. I felt unloving and uncompassionate.
I didn't realize that after I would have these complications and that I'd really be struggling emotionally. They didn't tell me any of that. I wish somebody had.
And I remember putting on my mask, going to church, crying myself to sleep every night in your arms, Dale. And we would just justify it and say we did what we had to do. But for 12 years, that went on.
I began wearing a mask to hide the shame and guilt of what I had done. I began partying in nightclubs and drinking to the point of falling down drunk. I used illegal drugs, anything I could use to numb the pain that I was in.
So I went back to school, pretended like it didn't happen, but I started drinking and smoking some pot and trying to get rid of the pain that was just so deep.
I just remember a lot of partying, a lot of drinking, even experimenting with certain drugs.
I became very promiscuous. I started drinking more, taking drugs.
I immediately started to drink, use drugs.
I began to drink more. I used more drugs.
I began to just live in the bars, drink heavily, do drugs, became very sexually active.
I started drinking, I started doing drugs, and I became very promiscuous.
I was sexually promiscuous because I had no self-worth. I didn't believe I deserved love.
This time, I wanted to be the lover and the leaver. I wanted to be in control of the situation or in control of the relationship, which led to another pregnancy.
I hated myself, and I thought the only way someone would possibly love me is if I gave them part of me. And so I got pregnant 2 more times. And I was on birth control both of those times as well.
More sexual relationships, more promiscuity, that ended up in 5 more pregnancies and 5 more abortions.
In the year before starting to medical school, I worked at an abortion clinic doing physical examinations and also family planning for the women who came there. My thought process was that I would instruct them on using birth control and would prevent the need for abortion in the future. What I found actually was that women were returning for repeat abortions. And my question was, had I not given them the proper instructions? Had I left something out of the instructions completely? It never occurred to me that it was not the instructions in family planning, but it was the behavior and repeat behavior that was causing the problem.
Over the next 4 years, I had 3 more abortions with acquaintances and guys from work. They weren't even serious relationships. I began to use abortion as a form of birth control.
I went through bouts of deep depression. Guilt haunted me. Shame followed me.
I began suffering from depression and panic attacks for which I had to take medication. I'd never had to take medications for anything like that before.
After my abortion, I was really depressed, and I sought help from some psychiatrists, and I got on antidepressants. The thing about it is I could tell them everything bad about me and everything I thought was wrong about the sexual abuse and other things, but I could not tell them about the abortion.
Through all the work that was done within those counseling hours, the question of abortion never came up. I was never asked. I never shared it. So we never really got to the roots of my deep problems.
At the time, I didn't realize that the depression was coming from the abortion I had had.
At one time, I went to go see a counselor, and I was having depression over my abortion, and she told me that I just needed to get over it, that women every day have abortions and they never think twice about it. She said, you just need to move on with your life and forget the past.
I knew deep inside of me that what I had done was take the life of my own child.
And I was drowning in this party atmosphere just to numb myself from the pain that I was feeling that I had taken the life of my own baby.
I felt empty, and I would cry, and I couldn't understand my feelings. This was my right to do this. All the feminists said is my body, my right. This was going to help me. Why didn't I feel that way?
As time went on, my heart got more and more empty, and I tried more and more things to try to fill it up. More drugs, more work, more accomplishment, another degree in school, increasingly dysfunctional relationships.
I went through angry spells where I hated men, or I hated myself, or, I hated other people.
I was in a downward spiral of self-destruction that lasted years.
They said my life would get back to normal again. It's never been back to normal again.
The grief and trauma and shame that we as women deal with this choice, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy.
After my abortion, there were around 4 years that I tried to get on with my life, and that looked like overeating and undereating, drinking, promiscuity. I had nightmares. I became depressed. I felt anxious and shamed.
Whenever the issue of abortion was raised, either in conversation with friends or a piece on TV, I felt myself having physical symptoms like sweaty hands, upset stomach.
I can remember not being able to look at commercials about babies without crying. If we went to the mall and I saw a little baby, I would start crying. I remember feeling very guilty about not having my babies.
Every year, on that anniversary date of my abortion, I would go into a depression for about a 3-week period. Every time I heard the word abortion, I would break down in tears and just cry.
I just felt shame, I felt guilt. I would grieve, and I grieved for my 2 children that I wanted so desperately, and I know I could never have. I wanted to meet them. I wanted to see what they would have looked like, their voices. And I never gave them the chance to live. And I lived with this every single day.
I had nightmares of babies crying, and I even tried to get pregnant a second time on purpose with my boyfriend.
I was haunted by reoccurring nightmares, and all I could see was mutilated babies' bodies, and I'd see mountains of them.
I have nightmares where I would save myself and let my first child just plunge to a raging river where I would save myself and let her die. And I remember her words, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," until she was no more.
For 13 years, I tried to deny it. I tried to forget it. I tried to walk away from that horrible memory. But I couldn't. It followed me all the way through my life. It affected every area of my life. It affected me as a woman, as a mother, as a wife.
I was so numb inside and full of self-loathing, just deeply depressed, and it finally just get to a point where I no longer wanted to live. I felt I could no longer go on.
And there was times that I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't leave her alone because she was so scared. There was one night in particular, in the middle of the night, she woke up and she was just crying. And I looked in her face and I just saw terror. I just saw total agony in her face.
I started to go on this merry-go-round of what was self-destruction in my life. And really what I was feeling was going into a deep, dark pit of hell.
I got to my lowest point that I just really pleaded to God to come take my life, that I couldn't deal with this pain any longer. And by that time, I had 2 girls. And my anxiety had gone full-blown into where I couldn't even talk. I was starting to stutter. I was afraid to go places.
I began to have suicidal thoughts, and I made a suicide attempt.
I remember pouring a whole bottle of Valium in my hand and a whole bottle of Librium in my hand, and I don't know how many aspirin I poured in my hand because I just felt like everything was just completely out of control, and I can remember taking them all.
I was listening to depressing music. I was in a pit and I could not get out. I even tried to kill myself. I turned the gas on in the oven, and thank God a friend came to the door. I tried 2 other times to kill myself as well. My life was out of control.
After trying to commit suicide, my father committed me to a mental hospital. I was there about 2 or 3 months and had several sessions with a psychiatrist there. And he told my father that there wasn't really anything major wrong with me. I didn't really have any mental disorders or anything like that, but he had come to the conclusion that the depression that I experienced that led to the suicide was a direct result of the abortion that I experienced, and that I had not had an opportunity to work through all the issues concerning the abortion.
My alcohol abuse was really strong, and then I would turn to cocaine so that I could feel something again, and then I would try to come down by drinking alcohol, and then I would want to feel something again, so I'd do some more cocaine, and it was such a vicious, vicious cycle, and it had a hold of my life, and I couldn't do anything about it. In fact, one night, I looked into my bathroom mirror and I stared straight into my own pupils, and I saw a force in my pupils that had a hold of me that was stronger than me, a force so strong that I couldn't get away. So one night I got as high as I could, and I got in my bathtub and I ran the water, and I got my bottle of Jack Daniels, and I got my crack pipe. And I got as high as I could, as much as I could afford, and I was up to about $1,000 a day at that time in my cocaine habit. And I laid down and I slit my wrist, and I watched the blood start to flow out of my wrist and into the water and turn the water red. And I slowly just faded away.
After these 5 abortions, I began asking myself, what am I doing? What am I doing? And I started to realize that I was on this merry-go-round of self-destruction and feeling like I couldn't get off and that it had to stop. I could see that it was almost as though there was a spirit of death, a spirit of destruction that not only was having control over my life, but literally felt like that spirit was living inside of me and becoming who I was.
And in my despair, I think often to this day why I just wasn't gonna die with that baby at that point.
When my daughter was born, I came down with toxic shock syndrome and just about died. And I also blamed having my abortion, killing my own baby. I was going to be killed. I was being punished, as what I thought, by God for having that abortion.
These feminist groups do not care about women. They care about abortion. And we need to start talking about this. We need to start asking all our pro-abortion friends, family members, colleagues, politicians, why do women need abortion? Don't you understand all the trauma that we suffer because of this? All the depression, the suicide attempts, the alcohol and drug abuse, the infertility, and even the death. Women are dying from their so-called legal right to choose.
The caller ID said it was Laura calling. We were always so happy to hear from her. She was such a joy. When I answered the phone, though I didn't hear Laura's voice, I heard screaming and crying. I could make out 4 words: Laura, not breathing, emergency room, and abortion. I immediately called the hospital and I finally got the doctor in the ER to talk to me. He was telling me everything they did for Laura, how hard they worked on her. And I kept praying the whole time, God, give her a chance. Then the doctor got to the end of the sentence and he said 2 words that hit me like thunder. He said, she's gone. The oxygen was sucked out of my room when he said those words. We got there at 2 o'clock in the morning. Laura was brought down to the morgue. I have not led a sheltered life, but nothing prepared me for this. To see my beautiful daughter wheeled out on a gurney in a body bag. He unzipped the body bag and inside was laying my beautiful daughter, with all the tubes still attached to her.
I'm a nurse, and I've worked in the intensive care unit. And a few years back, a young girl came to our hospital with her boyfriend, she had just had an abortion 2 days prior, and she was bleeding very badly with a fever. She was taken to surgery immediately and ended up with a hysterectomy. She also was brought into our intensive care unit after her surgery, and eventually she passed away. As the parents came to the hospital, I watched a father lay across his his daughter's bed, weeping that he would never hear her voice or talk to his daughter again.
The sad thing is the girl grows up front, pays her money, and then because the abortionist has to have a specimen in order to collect his commission, he probably scrapes out more of the lining of the uterus of a young woman that's not pregnant. We'll never know how many abortions are done on women every day across this nation that are not pregnant. But one is too many.
I went for a 3-month checkup, no cycle. The doctor says, well, you don't need another baby. Let's do a menstrual extraction. Well, actually, we know today that a menstrual extraction, or a D&C, can be an abortion. I discovered that that was my second child because there again, the medical assistant for that doctor, after he finished, there was a lot of material from the procedure that he did, little lumps of my baby actually. And I remember she rushed to get rid of that, and the doctor came back in. Oh, you're okay, go home, you're fine. Don't mention this to anybody at the church. Don't mention this to anybody in your family. Let me send you to a nice place, which was Planned Parenthood. They immediately put me on birth control pills, and I contracted a condition called phlebitis, or the clotting of blood that was really a dangerous situation. And after that process, they put me on an IUD, which caused some scarring and further damage to my cervix and parts of my body. And so I had no idea that all of these procedures that the abortion doctor or Planned Parenthood was carrying me through was hurting my procreative reproductive health.
I got married at 20 years old, and shortly after that, decided to have children. And as time went on, was not able to conceive. As I went to a doctor to find out why, I was then told, because of all the scar tissue that was in my uterus because of my choice of abortion, that I possibly would never be able to conceive a child. I ended up having 12 surgeries, laparoscopies, D&Cs, fertility drugs. I had about 4 to 5 miscarriages, all due to the choice that I made 2 years or 3 years prior to that.
I went to the doctors and had a laparoscopy and a dye test. They showed me on the screen where my tubes were blocked, and it was from the suction of the machine because of the abortions. One of my tubes was 90% blocked, the other one was 100% blocked.
The doctor told me that because of all of that scarring in my uterus from the abortions, that I had been left infertile and that most likely I would not become pregnant again.
I was 16 when I had my abortion. I'm 48 now, and I'm still coming to terms with the fact that I'm never going to have children the normal way.
I have been in the practice of medicine for over 20 years. And one of the greatest tragedies I have seen has been the tragedy of many women returning for evaluation of infertility. They are now 30 years of age, they're married, and have been trying unsuccessfully to achieve pregnancy.
I lay on the table and started thinking, how am I going to tell my husband that I'm not going to be able to have children with him? It was the reality of knowing that the only 3 children I would ever bear, I killed.
There's not enough tissue in my office to handle the tears of the women when they realize that they may have killed the only baby that they will have. The regret, the remorse is significant. I may be the only person that they have ever told that they had an abortion. Their husbands are not even aware of their past.
Around 5 years after my abortion, I got married and we started trying right away to have a baby. My longing for a child to replace the one that I aborted was very strong, and I was very excited to find out I was pregnant. When I was around 10 weeks along, I started bleeding, and I was told that my baby's heart had stopped beating and I had a miscarriage. I was told I would pass a plum-sized clot, and that is not what happened. I went into labor in a restaurant. I passed out trying to get my Tylenol with codeine, and I went home to my apartment with my husband, and I delivered that baby into my hand. I remember looking at this child in my hand and seeing tiny fingers and toes and arm and leg and a precious face and a tiny little rump. And I remember screaming, "My baby, my baby, my baby." And I realized that I had killed one as precious as this.
When I decided to have this abortion, my son was 6 months old. And I can remember after coming home from the abortion clinic, my son was crying and I was in so much pain I couldn't hold him. And I know that even that day that something in our relationship changed. I couldn't comfort him, I couldn't love on him like a normal mother any longer.
There was a gap between my 3rd child and my 4th child. They were 4 years apart, and the child I aborted would have been right in between there. So as my youngest was growing up, I would always be reminded that I had another child that could have lived if I would have had the courage and not believed the lies that I believed. That's been very difficult to live with.
It was the month of January. My mother sensed how depressed I was. She remembered that this would be the month that the babies would be born, and she said, "You know, this is when you would have had the twins. And you're depressed because your body is longing to hold a baby that you can't have. Your body knows that you were pregnant and you're supposed to be a mother, and that's why you're so depressed, because you're longing to hold a baby."
I will never lose the regret or the grief over not being able to hold the baby.
In counseling women, I found that many of them did not understand that their circumstances and their situations would change, and they would be able to choose other decisions in the future. But if they chose to end that baby's life at this time, that baby would never have another opportunity to live. In other words, they had elevated their situation and circumstances above the life of that child, and their future, as well as the baby's future, would never be the same.
In every one of those abortions, what I was doing was weighing a human life against the circumstances. And I was always counting those circumstances as being more important than this human life.
My dad lived about 15 years after my mom died. After he died, I was able to get a hold of my parents' journals from Bible studies and other programs they had been through, and I realized how much the whole experience had actually impacted them and their marriage and our family, and how big it really was for everybody.
It's a problem that affects all of our children and all of the children in the United States. because they're living in a society that doesn't value them. And their life is not valued, and they're not valuing other people's lives. You see, abortion doesn't just impact a single woman, it impacts everybody.
I came to realize that our children are not our enemy, and that women can do the things that they want to do and achieve the things they want to achieve without having to have their babies killed. And that the original feminists, like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, were pro-life. And they said that abortion stripped women of their dignity and relieved men of their responsibility to women.
The choice goes beyond that day, and it goes beyond the person who's making the choice. It affects everyone around us, and it'll affect your future family, not just the family that you have right now.
When I got pregnant the first time and I chose abortion, I was thinking of me. I was thinking about how my life and my college degree and my journalism major and all those things that were important were forefront. I never took into consideration that those choices, that abortion, would have lasting effects on my family, that my son would be missing siblings. It never crossed my mind.
I called my daughter home from college that weekend. She was 20 years old. My son was 11. I then proceeded to have to tell them that I had had their sister murdered 23 years before that. It was the most difficult conversation I'll ever have in my life.
I knew that I had to tell my parents that they had grandchildren they were never going to hold. I had to tell my brother and my sisters that they had nieces and nephews they were never going to meet. I started wondering who they'd be and realized I changed my family tree. There was going to be Christmases and holidays that there were going to be people missing. And then I started wondering about the grandchildren that I was going to be missing as well.
I thought many times, well, I won't be able to be at my little girl's first birthday party. I won't be having those father-daughter talks. I won't be able to take her to school the first day or walk down the football field at homecoming. I'm going to miss those occasions.
I will never forget, and I will always regret the decision to abort my children. I am 46 years old today, and I have no living children. The children that God put in my womb, I took the life of each one of them.
We don't allow ourselves to grieve, because what would we be grieving? But when we acknowledge that this was a child, that's when our healing can begin.
When I graduated from college, got pregnant the night that I graduated, and decided that abortion was definitely not another choice. So gave birth to my son Davis. And now as I held my newborn son, that reality, that God placed that life there, that God was honoring me to parent that young man, was amazing. And I knew at that moment that I had let our Lord down, my God down, because I chose to end a life that He had blessed me with.
It's been 26 years since my abortion, and I still have moments of grief. You know, when you're pregnant, you carry a child for 9 months. When you've had an abortion, you carry them forever.
I remember when the doctor said it's a girl, I just cried and just said, you know, looked up at the doctor and said, how am I going to raise her? How am I going to raise 4 girls on my own? And I still hadn't bonded then. I still was somewhat disconnected. They took me to the room and they brought the baby to me, and as soon as I held her, there was just an instant bond there. And I knew I had done the right thing. And I knew that this child was a blessing and that God had given me a second chance.
About a year later, I again saw my boyfriend briefly and became pregnant again. I went to a clinic and they showed me a picture of little feet at 15 weeks. And I remember the reality and the impact of seeing those little feet and thinking to myself, that was a baby before. It was a real baby and it had a little feet.
The hardest part of that was seeing those ultrasounds. When he was 8 weeks in the womb, which was the time that I terminated my first child, I got to see that. I got to see what I did. And although those ultrasounds were wonderful to look at, they were extremely bittersweet because they brought to my attention the life that I had taken. The heart was beating. He was sucking his thumb, pushing his hand against my belly, and all I kept thinking about was what I had done to his older sibling.
Well, when I saw the ultrasound, I saw a baby, and this baby was younger than the child that I had aborted, and I saw the body parts. I didn't see the ultrasound before my abortion.
We asked the moms after they've had the ultrasound how they felt prior to the ultrasound, whether they're abortion-minded or not, and now that they've seen their baby, how they feel. And I'd say 95% of them change their minds and choose life for their babies.
I never, ever would have had an abortion if I could have seen the ultrasound.
When we do ultrasounds on gals that are 6 weeks or less, it's amazing that we can even see the heartbeat at that early stage of development.
They almost immediately ask for their boyfriends to come in, and they look at the monitor and can't believe that there's a heart beating at 6 weeks.
And we also have been going into the public high schools to talk to them about fetal development. This is 4 models that we bring to our classrooms, and these are size 7 weeks to 10 weeks gestation.
As a sonographer, I have the wonderful opportunity to see the babies in the womb, to see that little heartbeat at just 4 weeks following conception, to see the little baby moving at just 7 weeks. Hi, Charlotte. My name is Sherry, and I'm going to be doing your ultrasound today.
Great.
How you doing? To introduce these babies to the parents for the first time. It's incredible, and I always believed that if wombs had windows and the world could see what I see every day, there would not be an abortion issue. We're going to be able to measure and tell exactly how far along, and this is the most accurate time to determine when your due date is, because the baby's little yet. Okay. When a woman is considering abortion and she can see through the ultrasound her baby, when she can see that little heartbeat, and when she can get the love and support that she needs to carry that baby, 90% do not choose to abort. Look at him move. Look at his arms move. The heart. Look at his face. Look at his mouth open for you. See that? Look at that. Oh, this is so cool. I love this little age. Look at those little feet. And those arms wave. Next week, this baby's going to be moving and jumping all over the place. Let me take another.
There on the ultrasound, I saw my little girl. I saw her heart beating. I saw her arms and her legs, and it hit me. That is life. How can anyone deny that that is life?
Had I been shown that ultrasound, had I been shown that 12-week fetal model, I would have never had an abortion. I would have understood that my baby growing inside of me was already a living baby. I would have never taken the life of my child.
And then the horror of what I had done to my 2 babies hit me. And I thought, that woman so many years ago lied to me. That is not a clump of cells. That is life.
In the late 80s, transvaginal ultrasound was introduced using the high frequency that allowed us to have superb resolution and seeing the baby at 1 inch with fingers and toes. And this little baby's gonna grow so fast. And this one is 20 weeks. I know, isn't it amazing? But look at the baby looks the same. Everything is present. It's just gonna need just to grow bigger and get more fat on it. And then as we continue to grow in our technology and information, we have now 3-dimensional ultrasound and 4-dimensional, which adds the movement to the 3-dimensional. And now we can see the baby exactly what it looks like. We're doing surgery in the womb now and treating the baby as a separate patient. It's amazing the information that we have learned through ultrasound.
Rush Limbaugh is the devil incarnate to feminists. And I hated him. I never listened to him before, but I hated him. But I thought, well, I really need to listen to him. Why do they hate him so much? And he started talking about the unborn baby's right to live. I never even considered that. It was always my right, my body, my choice. So this blew my mind again. And I thought I needed to check out things even further. So I decided to go to church. And it turns out you Christians aren't that bad. I walked into the church and I felt like I was finally home. And as I'm standing there in the pew listening to the priest say the Mass, all of a sudden, this beam of power from above comes down, it hits me on my head, and it knocks me to my knees. And in that moment, I knew that there was a God, that Jesus Christ was his son, and he wanted me here. And I walked out of that church that day, and I reclaimed my dignity as a woman and a daughter of God. I was so filled with joy, I started to sob. And my daughter looked at me and she said, "Mommy, what's wrong?" And I just looked up at her and I said, "I'm so happy." And I was. After all those years of searching for happiness through the drugs, the alcohol, the sex, the feminism, I finally found it in the last place I'd ever expected to find anything, in church.
I thought that God was just for stupid people. It was for people that needed crutches because they were too intellectually small to figure out what to do with their lives.
I was always afraid of the Christian community when it came to abortion because so much of the talk seemed to be so judgmental and so angry towards the woman. And I had constantly avoided the Christian community. But one morning I was driving to work and I heard a young woman talking on Focus on the Family. And she was a child of a Baptist minister and she had gone through some of the same things that I had. And it was the first time that I thought perhaps that there was some safety in that community and that perhaps maybe I could reach out to them.
After my third abortion, I walked out of that clinic like a zombie and I just wanted to die. I tried to commit suicide twice within the next 3 months. But that's when the Holy Spirit began to pursue me and the Lord saved me. That's when my salvation came.
See, I tried everything the world had to offer to make me happy, to forget, to put it behind me, and nothing worked. And in my deepest, darkest hour, where death was calling me, suicide was haunting my thoughts, the Lord Jesus Christ revealed himself to me. And he showed me how much he loved me. And he told me that he'd forgive all sins if I just put my faith in him.
And I did.
After my 6th abortion, I felt like I was going crazy and literally started banging my head against the wall. And within a few short months, I found myself in a church, and I heard a pastor start talking about this scripture, I haven't given you a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love, a spirit of power, and a spirit of sound mind. And he also started to say that I think that there's somebody here today that has been thinking about committing suicide, about taking your life, and I want you to come forward and let me pray for you. And I moved forward that day because I was desperate to get off of that merry-go-round of abortion.
I had to confess out loud that I was responsible for the death of 2 of my children through abortion. And it was the hardest thing I ever did in my whole life, was to speak it out loud. But when I did, the healing began. The grieving began.
Once I became a Christian, God began opening my eyes to the truths of abortion. He began, over the years, slowly exposing the reality of abortion to me, and I finally realized that it wasn't a blob of tissue that was inside of me, that abortion took the life of my child, and I began to realize that I was responsible for killing 4 of my own children.
I can remember just taking my hands and placing them on the bed and crying out to God and asking Him, Lord, help me, forgive me for what I've done. And I started to just open my Bible because at that time there were no abortion recovery Bible studies. And He had me look at one scripture, and it was 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins, I am faithful, Cindy, to forgive you of your sin and to cleanse you of all unrighteousness. And I began crying out to Him for that forgiveness, and I can remember that day that I did, that I could just feel a release in my heart from all of the pain that had been there from the abortions.
2 weeks later, after I found out that I was pregnant, I actually accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior at a crisis pregnancy center. And being pregnant and having my son was wonderful. I was overjoyed. It was one of the happiest times of my life. And although it was very happy, I was unable to bond with my son because of the abortions I had had.
The bonding with my children and the bonding and the intimacy with my husband were huge hurdles that I had to overcome. And then ultimately, intimacy with God and building that relationship. You don't feel worthy. You've taken life from your own womb. You've got low self-esteem. I could barely look in the mirror.
My relationship with my husband was affected, and especially in the sexual area of our life. I couldn't seem to get beyond the fact of shame and disgust with my body and what I had done with it when I was single. My husband was very understanding and very tender with me and always has been. We've been married 20 years, and I would say the majority of those 20 years that's been an issue.
My mom had come to know the Lord, and she called me one day. And a conversation on the phone, she started talking to me about the love of Jesus Christ and the hope in Him. And she started telling me how much she loved me and how much she cared for me, and that no matter what I could have done, that God would still love me. So I came home that night to my parents' house and went to a conference with them, and I received the Lord Jesus as my Savior, and my life changed.
It was my parents who sat me down after a while and said, we really think that there's something emotionally going on with you. That's why you're so ill and you seem so sad. And at that moment, something in me snapped, and I began to weep uncontrollably and couldn't speak. And it was my mother who turned to me and said, "Kelly, did you have an abortion?" And it took me a little bit to confess that, yes, I had. And then we were able to pray.
At this retreat, the first testimony I heard was about a girl who had 2 abortions and how God healed her and forgave her. That weekend, I gave my life to the Lord, and I was forgiven for having my abortion.
My husband and I were invited to a fundraising banquet at a local crisis pregnancy center, and I felt so out of place until the next speaker came up, and it was a woman talking about her abortion and the healing that she received. And I just wanted what this woman was talking about, the freedom in Jesus to once and for all lay that sin at the cross and receive healing and then go on and help other women.
I found myself in a small, intimate Bible study with 5 women, one of which was my women's ministry leader and one of which was my Sunday school teacher. They began to tell their stories, and for the first time in my life, I heard both of them talk about the abortions that they had had in their past. This made me free to tell my story in the small, intimate group, and I felt safe there. I proceeded to tell them everything that had happened in my past, the very first time in 23 years I had ever admitted to anyone other than my ex-husband that I had had an abortion, and that began my healing process.
After 12 years of marriage, we found our marriage was really in trouble. We had our 3rd son, and we was really struggling. The marriage ended up taking a turn for the worse. We both started looking outside of the marriage for happiness. Both of us ended up having an affair, and my wife ended up pregnant from that affair. Once we agreed to try and make the marriage work, my immediate goal was to terminate that pregnancy. So I began to really torment my wife to terminate this pregnancy. I told her there's no way I could stay with her. She was going to keep this child. And she agreed to have the abortion. The day of the abortion came, and I remember getting up early to take her to get the abortion. And she woke up, and she told me she couldn't have the abortion. Well, I was broken. I left the house. I came back a little while later. I remember her giving me a hug and telling me she was sorry. And that was the first time I accepted the fact that I can make this work. So we ended up making it work. We had the baby. He's almost 5 years old now, and he's been a blessing in our life. I don't regret any of it.
Abortion at its core, it's real simple to understand what it is. It's sin. And that does not mean that all sin should be against the law or we'd all be in prison. Abortion should be against the law because it contravenes the fundamental right of the unborn child. But sin starts the same way every time. It starts with a lie. It's not really a human being. You can do this and forget about it. It's a simple procedure. It won't have any effect. You don't really love the girl you got pregnant. You don't want to marry her. You're doing her a service by paying for this abortion. But sin is not satisfied with the lie, because the lie's aim is ownership. Just as all sin, when we engage the lie, its aim will be to own us, because with ownership comes its true aim, and that's destruction. The woman on the table who has the abortion, despite all the lies of our culture, knows what she has done. And that knowledge will destroy her but for the intervening grace of God that teaches her that the foot of the cross is level.
As pastors, as we speak out against the evil of abortion, we have to remind ourselves that all of our congregations have women that have gone through the pain of abortion. And some of them made this choice before they came to faith in Christ, and others made the choice after they came to faith in Christ. Regardless, it reminds us that the church is a spiritual hospital and that we have to provide the spiritual care, love, and grace to rebuild the lives of these women who've gone through this pain, to let them understand that the forgiveness of God is unlimited.
And then I realized that I had to forgive, that I needed to forgive myself. I needed to forgive my boyfriend from way back then. I didn't realize I hadn't done it. I needed to forgive my present husband, and I needed to allow Jesus Christ to come in and heal those wounds that I had carried for years and years and years.
God can take this poor decision and remove the impact of it through His grace. And that Christian mother is going to reunite with that baby someday in heaven, according to God's Word.
You see, I love my child that I lost just as much as I love the 3 children I have today. I know someday I'm going to meet that child in heaven, and that's what keeps me going.
My mother died suddenly of a stroke. And as she was dying, I was realizing that she would never hold my children. And I'd always had that fantasy that we could all make it better once I had real children at the right time. And I knew that my mother was in heaven, and I started to picture that she was there with my baby.
There's no more powerful witness against abortion than a woman who's been deceived by the falsehood of abortion, who has the courage through the grace of God to stand up and speak the truth. That's why it truly is a condemnation of our pastors who refuse to have faith in the grace of God and do not speak the truth about what abortion is, because they're afraid they might offend.
When you talk about this, people are hurt, they're angry. We know some of the things that they've been through, and they push back. And the temptation, of course, is to be silent. But we can't be silent. And so there's a tendency, I think, among us as priests not to want to talk about this from the pulpit. But when we fail to do so, I think that people are there suffering already. That we need to signal to them somehow that there can be forgiveness, that there can be acceptance, that there can be a new start in their lives.
The generation of ministers alive today do not want to touch the hot topics. And if we don't address so fundamental an issue of life as associated with abortion, then I fear there'll come a day that we will not be able to address these issues. And it's as simple as this, that when Jeremiah was in the womb of his mother, God said He formed him. And we know from the scriptures that life begins at conception. And God is the only one who gives life, and God is the only one who should take life.
If you're a pastor, I urge you to address this topic with your congregation. For the sake of those suffering silently in the pews that need to hear a word from you addressing this issue. Not just the negative side of it, the poor decision that they've made, but the fact that there's healing and there's hope. There's wholeness that can be achieved through Christ as a result of that decision.
Anytime a pastor will allow someone to give their testimony, there is breakthrough. For the ones that are sitting on the church pew like I was for 12 years in their silent shame, once that person hears someone give a testimony, it gives them permission to heal or to call for help.
We must speak out, we must be vigilant, and we must do everything in our power to save the lives of little babies. And if we don't, we will be accountable before Almighty God. And if this nation does not repent of this great sin, I fear that God may bring America to her knees in a way that will remind America that it was His grace that began so great a nation, and it is His power that can vector the attention of this nation to Himself. This is a horrible, tragic reality in the United States, and it has grown because the ministers of this country have been absolutely silent.
Please, Pastor, address this issue. If you don't feel comfortable doing it yourself, There are many leaders across the country that would gladly come in and share with your congregation about this issue.
The Bible study that took me through the healing process was beautiful, but it was very painful, very difficult. But each week, I got a little better, a little bit more healing came. And when I finished going through that program, I was a different woman.
But it wasn't until the last study, the last lesson, where part of the lesson was to write a letter to a baby that you aborted and say the things that you wish you could have said. And it was right then and there where I felt the Lord touched me, and I broke. I was on the floor of my bedroom crying, and I was weeping heavily. But I knew that I was healed. I knew God had healed me, and it touched my heart, and He had set me free.
14 years after my abortion, I went to a journaling workshop for a weekend. One of the things I did during my dialogue to my child was be very honest and broken and sorrowful, and said I was sorry. And I remember the dialogue, what came back, and what I heard from this child was, "Mommy, don't cry."
I was able to finally put personhood to each of my babies and grieve the loss of each one of them. And part of the recovery program is to have a memorial service for your babies, which really helped to bring closure to the fact that I had lost 4 babies to abortion.
It was a wonderful experience to see what she and Art had done to memorialize these children. But it was sad also because these were my grandbabies, which I've never been able to hold.
All her family was here to support her. It was really beautiful. As she read the letters to those 4 babies, the tears of sadness fell down her cheeks. And it was just so sad to watch what women go through when they finally realize what they've done.
I named my baby Mercy because over the years I had learned that one of my gifts was the gift of mercy. And I realized that she was probably the only gift of a natural child that I would ever have. And so I went up into the mountains with my counselor, and we had a memorial service, and I put her to rest. And that was pretty much the beginning of my grieving process.
We knew in our hearts that it was our little girl that we would never hold in our arms. And I just want to let you know that we did name our little girl Jill Allison because that helped us heal.
One evening, a group of us with other post-abortive women, we had this memorial service. It was a very special evening. It was an evening that I publicly acknowledged Olivia and Michael, and I was able to give them the dignity that they deserved.
I didn't believe in symbolic things, and I thought religious people were crazy, and it was a Catholic retreat. At one point, the leader said, "If you close your eyes and ask God to reveal your baby to you, He'll do it." And I thought, yeah, right. But I was crying and I was in extreme emotional pain. And I did close my eyes and I did ask God to reveal my baby to me. And when I did, I heard a little girl's voice say, "Mommy, I forgive you. Mommy, I forgive you." And that is when I knew that my daughter forgave me, that God forgave me, and that it was okay to forgive myself for what I had done.
I was involved in a Bible study called Forgiven and Set Free. And it was through that process that I was able to continue to look inward and see that there were still some areas that wasn't quite healed. But as I yielded to the Holy Spirit and to the Lord and allowed Him to heal me, more healing came.
Concluding the 9-week Forgiven and Set Free Bible study, we did have a memorial service for our babies. We were able to name our children and give them the dignity that they deserved. I chose to name my son Isaiah, and I know that one day I will see him in heaven.
At that memorial service, I remember
writing some things and expressing some things to my child about how I wish I had had a chance to know her, to play with her, and to see her grow up. During this time, I was having dreams about children, but it was more of a child that was already grown, and I really felt like I saw her face and I knew that it was a girl, and I named her Debbie.
And the children that I had lost, I grieved them, and I named them Aubrey, Jamie, and Lee. They're part of me, they're part of my heart, they're part of my family.
I believed it was a boy, and so I named him Ian Gabriel. I wanted to have some tangible thing to remind me of that child and give him substance. And so I bought this real adorable teddy bear. And what ended up happening was I would hug it when I was sad and hug it when I was grieving. And again, it was another part of bringing healing and coming to terms with it. He has long little arms that kind of can go around your neck, and he fits real well. And it kind of works when you think about wanting to hold a child that you haven't been able to.
Since 1973, when abortion became legal through Roe v. Wade, every child born since then is an abortion survivor.
High school students and college students are the highest targeted age group for abortion, and they need to know that there's healing and recovery. They need to know that they are worth something and that every child is worth something.
Since my abortion, I've often thought about all the things that I wasn't told and that I was told, and how they left out the truth about what abortion does to a woman and to a baby. I've gotten angry about that, and I've wondered, if they don't tell you what's going to happen, how is that a choice?
Wouldn't it be better to help a woman in an unintended pregnancy with support and real resources so she can really keep her baby than convince her that it's okay to have her unborn baby sucked from her womb and thrown in the trash? Wouldn't it be more compassionate to help her?
I would just encourage any woman that found themselves in the same situation that they would really think twice about it, and that they wouldn't let fear lead them to make a decision that they would regret the rest of their life.
You don't want to live a life of regrets, wondering what your child looked like, wishing you could hear their laughter, because one day you will experience that if you choose to give your child life.
There's life and joy for everyone in America, and that should be from fertilization to natural death. And so I invite you today and always, it's very important to just choose life.
Many women have had abortions, and there's no place for them to go, to have the voice, to say it. I think there's a lot of women in hiding because of still the shame of admitting it and its impact in their life. So what I would want to say is, take courage and do so for yourself and for the memory of that child.